what's the point of humans? I think that's actually the most interesting question right now, because if you assume there are thousands of agents or hundreds of agents across your organization, and you can get hold of these things and put them in to do really repetitive, boring tasks and stitch them together, then what are the humans left doing?
What's a token, Ed?
Oh God, that's a hard thing to explain. That's a really difficult thing to explain. I'd say it's the currency now of large language models. Yes, we've been talking a lot about the agentic enterprise for the last 6 months or 9 months now. I think the way I describe it is it's humans and agents working together to deliver value. And it could be that a human is using an agent to support them, or it could be an agent is replacing part of a human's job and doing something, executing tasks that a human would do, which of course terrifies everyone that they're coming for your jobs.
Welcome to the AI Adoption Podcast. I'm your host, Professor Ashley Braganza, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Ed Thompson from Salesforce on this episode. Ed, before we get started, I wonder if you could just introduce yourself, say something about your role and about Salesforce, please.
Thank you, Ashley. I've been looking forward to this for several months in our planning. I work at Salesforce. It's a big software company with 80,000 employees and a $43 billion revenue stream. We're famous for CRM, for sales and marketing and customer service software. I work in a team called Market Strategy. So I spend a lot of time with customers. And at the moment, of course, everybody just wants to talk about AI. So I spend all my time every day talking to customers about AI with respect to Salesforce.
And that's really a great place to start this conversation, because I just wonder if you could reflect on what's the state of AI adoption, not just in the UK, but if I take a European perspective as well. What are your insights that you're getting when you're speaking with customers in terms of where they are in this AI adoption lifecycle?
Well, of course, one of the first questions, of course, is what are the customers, the consumers doing? So that's having a bearing on what's happening. And the consumers, I think I was looking up the other day that Meta is now at 1.2 billion users. Of course, that's just because people are using WhatsApp and things, but and Facebook. But most people are more interested in what's happening with ChatGPT, which is what, at 900 million or a billion users, something like that. So you tend to find that, that's a bearing on the consumer-facing businesses, because obviously they're having to react to the fact that consumers are doing things. But if you look inside businesses, I think the first thing to say is pre-ChatGPT, which is only 3.5 years ago now, you had about 50% of big companies using some sort of AI, predictive forecasting, next best action type stuff. Now that's at sort of 95%. There's still a few percent not doing anything, but it's very little. But then when you dig into them, most of them have got themselves Microsoft Copilot and that sort of thing. And so then you say, okay, well, what are the leading companies doing? And it varies by industry. And in fact, I think the most interesting finding, if you look back over the last year, is that the leading companies are getting further and further ahead. And in every sector, you'll find that there are a handful, usually just a few companies that are way ahead of everybody else. And so the gap is widening, I think is the way I'd describe it. So one way of putting it is you could say, okay, the tech industry and telecoms are way ahead of some other sectors, literally a year ahead. But then even within those sectors, you'll find that there's companies who are literally 6 months, 9 months ahead of other companies. So to me, it's a sort of a widening gap between the leading companies and the others.
So, I mean, you've seen this in other products that come through. You've always got the early adopters that say, okay, I'm going to get in. We don't know where this is going to lead, but we're going to try it out. What's the next phase? What are the companies doing coming in behind? Are you seeing a wave of companies that are following the early adopters?
Yes. So I think the way I describe it would be that obviously we started with the ChatGPT generative AI stuff, which was put in really as a sort of general productivity improvement. So everybody's now writing emails, generating work slop, annoying their colleagues with badly written emails and badly created graphics, but they're also being more productive. In fact, any research you dig into this, you find that people are saving 14, 15 minutes per day. The problem in there is that if you do a survey of finance directors, there are multiple out there, if you go and have a look for them, they all suggest something like three-quarters of companies are seeing time savings, which is fabulous. But then you say, what's the financial benefit? And you find that it's somewhere around 10 or 11% of finance directors are saying, I can see the financial benefit. The interesting bit is the agentic stuff, which we've now had for 18 months. That seems to have a much bigger impact on the financial benefit than sort of general workplace and productivity tools. And I think the reason for that is the average employee might say 14 minutes, but does that mean that you now can get rid of them? No, it just means they go home on time and they say, thank you, I don't need to work at the weekend.
And are you seeing a difference between the public sector and the private sector in terms of AI adoption?
Yes, there's public sector are talking a lot, and there are some good examples. Again, it's a similar sort of picture. There are certain bits of the public sector are literally a year ahead, but the public sector is generally lagging the private sector. I think a lot of it's to do with risks. So regulated industries are tending to be quite wary and careful. So if you look at how they're putting in agents, they'll tend to put them as internal, operational, non-customer facing or supplier facing because they're worried about the brand and they're worried about regulatory compliance and risks attached to it and security. With other sectors, you see them just going gung ho. They're like implementing as many different agents as they possibly can. So to give you an example, we did a survey, I think about 2 or 3 months ago, about how many agents do you have? The problem with that is what do you mean by an agent? But parking that aside, the average was 12, and which is true but completely misleading. And I went and tested this in the spring, going around different customers asking how many do you have. Last September it was about two on average. By December it was four, now it's 12. So you see the hockey stick kicking in. But why it's completely misleading is you'll be in a room with, let's say, 20 customers, and there'll be one customer with 1,000 agents live. And then the next customer will have 20, and then there'll be half of them will have zero. So you see the average is 12, but it's completely misleading. What you've got is someone going absolutely gangbusters, and then a whole load of others who've done almost nothing. So the gap is massively widening between the sort of early adopters and others. And the quick followers, on average, have 12.
Well, uh, we've talked about, or you've mentioned agents.
Mm.
Just define for the audience what's an agentic organization, Ed?
Yes, we've been talking a lot about the agentic enterprise for the last 6 months or 9 months now. I think the way I describe it is it's humans and agents working together to deliver value. And it could be that a human is using an agent to support them, or it could be an agent is replacing part of a human's job and doing something, executing tasks that a human would do, which of course terrifies everyone that they're coming for your jobs. But it's both of them working together. And when you look into it, you can discover that you can apply agents in any part of the business. So an agent might usually do something quite repetitive and boring and verifiable. So it's booking meetings, or it's handling an insurance claim, or it's answering customers' questions like a glorified chatbot. So at the moment, what they've been doing is replacing tasks. So, and in fact, there's a lot of noise about replacing jobs, but what they're replacing is tasks. If you do a very repetitive task over and over again, yes, that puts you at risk. Most of us tend to do jobs with 40, 50 different tasks. But I think what's shifting is it's going to move from tasks to processes, where you start to stick the agents together so they do a whole process. And then, of course, you think it through logically, you go, well, okay, we'll go from tasks to processes to whole journeys, whole customer or supplier or partner journeys. So at the moment, we're very much still, for most organizations, just putting them in to perform particular tasks.
That's interesting. Because now I think what you've done is you've raised two issues. One is around, this gap between the early adopters and the rest.
Mm.
And now, and if you put a layer on top, which is around replacing tasks and moving, up the chain, if so to speak, to entire processes, that seems to indicate an interesting dynamic. Because are we saying that those early adopters will likely to head to changing processes clearly faster than those who haven't started? But
Yeah.
are the ones who are just getting going, are they not even looking at tasks?
They're talking a lot about it.
Okay.
I think actually your podcast is called the AI Adoption Podcast. So the issue is adoption, and it's quite interesting watching organizations and having some organizations you talk to them, they say we just want to be a fast follower, so we'll wait and see. We've seen other organizations who say, well, you guys are taking agents where you had to build them, and then you had to configure them, and now you're packaging them up, and so you can buy an agent that does a particular task. So why don't we just wait till you've worked it out, and we'll just buy instead of having to try and build these things. So there's different attitudes to organizations that some are very risk averse and saying we don't want to do that. We don't want to get involved at all. The risk committee is sitting there. I was talking to an organization the other day with 21 people on the risk committee, and I asked, how many agentic tasks have you approved in the last year? And they went zero. So I said, so nothing has got past this committee in the last year. So there's a lot to do with risk and how organizations view risk. But the other thing is, even if you get it working, let's say you build an agent, let's say it's a miracle, you've got perfect data. Nobody has perfect data, but let's say you have good enough data. You've got processes that the agent can trigger or workflow that actually works and is clean and well documented. And you put guardrails around it and you've done all the things you're supposed to do. And then you put it in. Does that mean the employees are going to accept this agent coming into their job? Not necessarily. So you get humans pushing back and saying, I'm not working with that agent, or I don't like that agent, or I feel threatened by that agent. So it becomes an adoption problem primarily when you actually put agents into the workplace.
And that really is at one level the heart of what this podcast is about is how do companies begin to address that, Ed? Because you can imagine that as these agents get implemented in different departments, there will be different levels of pushback and of adoption as well. Um, how do organizations deal with this? What have you seen going on?
So I think for smarter companies, they're not doing 100 experiments and dabbling. What they're doing is they're narrowing it down to a handful of use cases, typically three or four. They start small. They're not POCing, which I think is interesting. So you don't sit in a sandbox and play. You take real customer data or real supplier data or real partner data with real customers, real suppliers, real partners, real employees, and you build it out iteratively with the people it's going to affect. And I think that's the important bit. So it doesn't, people do not like things being done to them. But if you say to me, Ed, you do this task every day, it's really repetitive, you hate it. If we could take that off you, would you be interested? You usually get a positive response. Unless, of course, that's all I do all day, in which case I feel threatened. But if it's a task that is tedious, repetitive, and irritating, funnily enough, you get employees on board. So it's really about winning over the employees. I mean, there are a few organizations out there who are just doing this to their employees, but I think most organizations are smart enough to realize, wait a minute, if we want people to adopt this, we need to win them over. And likewise, you need to think about, well, what's the career path of these employees? And if this task is being replaced, what do the employees who did that task now do? So thinking about the impact on the humans is really, really important.
And I guess this issue about impact on jobs and impact
Mm.
on people is one which is, it's in the press very regularly
Yeah.
now. There is a huge amount of concern. Um, are organizations that you've seen, that you've been working with, starting to recognize this and address it in some way?
Yes, and I think the way I'd answer that question is to say that the press jumps on the stories of this organization fired 30,000 people, etc. Most of those stories have got nothing to do with AI. Their excuse. It's a strategic decision for completely other reasons why they're laying those people off and making those decisions. Often they're shifting their investment to capital investment, but they say AI, but there's no evidence they've actually been more productive yet. They're kind of doing it preemptively, but they're also a tiny, tiny fraction of what's really going on. The vast majority of companies are not in the mood to fire all their employees. What they're tending to think about is, well, natural attrition. It is affecting, so in other words, they'll say, take the contact center and say, well, we'll put these agents in to perform repetitive tasks, and we lose 20% of our contact center every year. We just don't replace them.
Hmm.
So they don't want to fire people. That's not really what the vast majority of leaders don't want to do that. The biggest impact I found is actually middle managers, which you might be surprised by. Of course, everyone talks about outsourcing contracts and everyone thinks about contact centers because there's a big impact there and what's happening in the HR function. But actually, if you look into it, it's middle management that's been most affected so far. And the reason for that is, imagine I build an agent that does your mid-year review. So we have a conversation, it summarizes it, writes it up, and puts it into the HR system instead of having to manually sit there and type it afterwards. Or compliance training, and we now talk to a screen and it coaches me. And so I don't have the manager have to coach me. Or signing off approval for travel. You start to put all these agents in there, you go, well, wait a minute. If managers are spending half their time doing this admin, and I remove the admin, I don't need as many managers.
Hmm.
But most organizations, what they're doing is delayering, the favorite phrase at the moment. So they're saying, well, wait a minute, I could have one manager to 10 instead of one to 6, or I could have 1 to 12 instead of 1 to 5. And so you end up, but then you say, well, that means all the middle managers are getting fired. No, that's not really what's happening. Some are retiring, there's some of that, but I think the more common pattern is they're going back to becoming sole contributors. I think that's the term being used. So in most cases, when I've dug into this, you find they're not being laid off. So at the moment, there's very little evidence of mass redundancy. And of course, that then raises the question, well, is there going to be a jobs apocalypse? Absolutely not. I don't think so at all. And the reason I say that is I don't think most companies are competent enough to implement this technology very aggressively. In other words, their data's not in a good state, their processes are terrible, their tech debt is terrible. And so if they could implement this extremely rapidly across the entire organization, yes, there might be a jobs apocalypse. But I find almost no one is able to do that, even if they want to do that. So my view is it's going to be much more like checkout staff in a UK supermarket where we've lost 115,000 jobs in 10 years. But nobody's crying about it because the checkout job was not that exciting. And there are still checkout staff, but interesting, those supermarkets now employ 5% more people because they're doing home delivery and they do a lot more other tasks inside those supermarkets. So I think it's going to come in, it's going to have a massive effect on employment. But my personal view is it's going to take a decade to filter through.
if you think about how the business case very often gets put forward for any kind of technology
Mm,
initiative, and I've been around a while, Ed,
mm.
as you can imagine,
Yeah.
I think you see that very often the business case is premised on if we can implement this technology, the most recent version now being AI, what we can do is we can get rid of, I mean, there's a percentage sign, I put a number in front of the percentage sign of staff that we currently have because the system will replace
Mm,
or do what the staff are currently doing.
mm.
Um, Given that that's the basis of even the AI adoption business cases, isn't there going to be a huge amount of pressure simply to lay off staff?
Oh yeah, I think there will be when you get it working, when you get the agents working, and where you can trust them and where you're happy with them. So the pressure will be there. It's kind of one of the things I find really interesting is all last year the agent thing really started summer of what we now 2024, and people started implementing them in late 2024 into early 2025. So we had basically early 25 was when people started, roughly 18 months ago, is when they became you could build them. And through 2025, we saw people, as I said, shifting from building to configuring to buying them.
Hmm.
But if you look across what happened during that year, everybody focused on cost reduction. And of course, they went, right, let's put them into operational processes, let's put them into customer service. Uh, Given who Salesforce is, we're obviously customer facing technology. It's kind of really interesting that over 80% of the implementations were customer service, and all of them aimed to reduce costs. And they did. They're quite successful, actually, if you look at the productivity improvement for customer service. But there are some side effects. So one of the things I find kind of interesting, if you take the first group of customers who went live, so this is spring 2025, by last autumn, they're all giving pay rises to their customer service staff. And you sit there and go, wait a minute, that wasn't quite the intended consequence. But the reason for that is, well, you've now doubled the productivity of your customer service people. Your customer service people are now multitasking, handling multiple different channels, and every question they get now is hard. All the easy ones are being handled by some agents. So what you're left with is highly skilled individuals that are difficult to replace. And so suddenly you realize, wait a minute, we've got to keep these people, whatever happens. So I've talked to organizations who've given their staff 30% pay rises in customer service. And they're now paying at 30% above the market rate to keep those people because they're highly skilled. So there are some sort of side effects I think people haven't thought through when you do this. But yes, if you look at those organizations, you look at the productivity per employee, it's massive improvement. But I'm not seeing mass layoffs. I'm seeing them just using natural attrition. They're just watching 10, 20% of their staff leave, and they say, okay, we just don't need to replace them.
And this issue about losing staff over a period of time. If I come back to that business case again for
Hmm.
AI adoption, clearly one issue is around the benefits, which is very often couched in terms of costs being reduced. But there's another part of the business case, which is the actual cost of implementing
Yes.
the systems. And what we're starting to see is the cost of tokens going up. I just wondered if you could shed some light on what's going on there, please.
I think this is fascinating, the cost of tokens discussion. So they went down for the last 5, 6 years. They've just been going down. In fact, they've gone down like 99 point something percent. And then they went up in May and June. But there's a couple of little misleading things in there. One is it's only the frontier models where the pricing's gone up, not the average lower end models. So it's kind of Anthropic and OpenAI. And the reason for that is they're burning through these agents that are now working are burning through tokens, and the tokens are burning through energy and burning through data centers. And so they're trying to build, these vast, everyone's reading about the amount of data centers they're trying to build and the energy required to do it. And the bottom line, the token price going up is having all these interesting effects. So one of the effects is that we've seen companies like Uber who burnt through their entire budget for tokens in 4 months. We've seen Microsoft restricting use of tools. We've seen other organizations like ours just saying, right, we're going to go and burn through as many tokens as we possibly can and build whatever we can. And we think there's a window here before the pricing goes up even further. But what that means is you get some interesting knock-on effects. So if you take a traditional piece of workflow in your business, you're running a traditional piece of software, and then you compare it to running it, burning tokens, triggering tools that use tokens, it's 1,000 to 10,000 times cheaper to use traditional software, traditional workflow. So it starts to become, you start to think about everything in terms of, well, how many tokens am I burning through to operate this? So there's a very big difference, I think, between building and operating. And if you're building, it makes every sense in the world to use these tools to and burn through tokens to build something. But ongoing operationally, you don't really want to do that. So we're seeing organizations, we're doing the same, by the way. We're spending a lot of time thinking about, do we need to use some sort of AI to operate this process, or could we just trigger something more traditional? Could we use a semantic layer to make them more efficient in setting the context or getting the context right? Could we build knowledge graphs that reduce the amount of token usage we do to operate it? Because everything is now about, well, how do I operate this without burning through lots of tokens? But the other way, of course, is to switch models. So it's fascinating to watch Z.ai popping up. I know they changed their name, their GLM 5.2 model. And you look at that and say, wait a minute, that's nearly as productive as Anthropic.
Mm.
It's a couple of months behind, and the cost per token is like a tenth. And so everybody's starting to look at. So an interesting data point I think is fascinating is if you look at startups in the AI world right now, 80% of them are using Chinese and open source models, not the leading edge models. And the reason for that is the cost per token is massively reduced. What it means, I think, for most businesses is you do not want to bet on just one model. You want to be flexible and be able to switch models as you need to and be able to move to lower cost, lower token prices. So yeah, token economics has now suddenly become a big deal in the last 3 or 4 months.
Ed, thank you for that really insightful explanation. But I am guilty of one thing, and that is introducing a term and maybe not giving you an opportunity to explain it. For the uninitiated, what's a token,
Oh
Ed?
God, that's a hard thing to explain. That's a really difficult thing to explain. I'd say it's the currency now of large language models. That's probably the way of describing it. It's so the way these models are working, we all know that they're basically predicting the next word in a sequence. That's all they're doing, really. Everyone thinks they're thinking and they look like they're thinking and they've got brains, and not really. They're just predicting the next word in a sequence. But to do that, you chunk up sentences and you chunk them up and attach tokens to them. So a token is like a word or a part of a syllable. And it's the currency of using these large language models. That's not a very good explanation, but I would describe it as currency.
Ed, thank you for that explanation. Let me move on just to understand. On the one hand, we've got this real cutting edge technology that's coming out. The government have clearly made it very clear that they see AI contributing to a significant amount of growth and productivity improvements, across the UK. But on the other hand, we're seeing very low consumption, very low adoption rates. Shed some light here. What's going on?
I think the issue here is that the technology, I don't think the proof of concept is over. In other words, I think it's proven. The proof of value, though, isn't there. So in other words, the challenge is how do we scale it and demonstrate value from it? And the way I would describe it for most organizations listening to this podcast is that the tech sector is about a year ahead. And the tech sector in the last quarter or two, you can see the financial effect now. So if you look at Salesforce's financials or Microsoft or ServiceNow or Oracle, you'll see the effect in there. You can see where we're spending more and where we're making savings, and you can see where we're generating more revenue. But it's taken us a year and a bit to get that into our financials. And I think there's a lag, unsurprisingly. And I'm pretty certain it's going to happen to every other sector as well. I think the people who think it's going to happen, sweep through in a couple of years are crazy. It's going to take a decade for most organizations to kind of fully put these agents in. But I think the way to think of it is that the evidence is now starting to appear. The interesting bit, I think, is not about cost savings. I know that's where everybody focuses right now. I think the interesting bit, and this started really last September as we first started seeing it, is the shift to using agents and AI for revenue growth. And I think that's a much smarter and more optimistic way of thinking about this, which is what would happen if we could, I know this is not a public sector thing, but what if we could grow our organization without adding as many headcounts and increase the revenue per head and grow our business and use this technology for growth? And likewise, how could we use this to grow our economy rather than just thinking of a way of stripping out costs? So I think the most advanced organizations have already pivoted from this is just a cost saving mechanism to wait a minute, let's apply this to growth. And I think that's a much better way of thinking about it.
And I think that's a very positive way of looking at how AI can be used. Assuming there's going to be this balance between, on the one hand, there will be some growth, but equally
Mhm.
there's going to be some pain in terms of
Yep.
job losses. Take a look into the future, Ed, from your perspective over the next couple of years. Where are we going to be if we were having this conversation in 2 years' time?
I think it's the first time in my career where you look forward and go, my God, I have no idea where this is going. And in fact, the closer you get to the people closest to what's going on at the center in the large language model guys, you realize they don't know what's going on either. Nobody, but it makes you feel very uncertain. I think our futures team at Salesforce, they posed three questions, which I think are quite a good way of thinking about it. So they're saying, well, you need to think about, well, how capable will these AI and these agents become? Because it's not sitting still. They're constantly improving. We're watching what these models are doing. We've all heard about Mythos and what it can do. The second question is, well, how will these AI tools impact work, which is what we've been talking about, work and organizations?
Yeah.
And the third one is, well, how will it affect consumer behavior? Because they're quietly slipping into your phone, whether you like it or not. You're going to have an agent sitting on your phone acting on your behalf. It already is, whether you like it or not. It's subtly in the background doing that. The one I think we spend most of our time thinking about is the impact on work and organizations. And I think a couple of things that are really interesting. One is let's make the assumption that let's flick forward not 2 years, but 10 years, and let's assume you now have hundreds of AI agents in your business performing tasks and actually stitching tasks together into processes. What effects that going to have? And I think a couple of things that happen. One is you start to say, wait a minute, the barriers between departments start to break down. So there'll be new organizational structures and new departments, and that will happen. The question is how? What are you going to do about it? And how do you pay people? And how do you incent people? But the more interesting one is what's the point of humans? I think that's actually the most interesting question right now. Because if you assume there are thousands of agents or hundreds of agents across your organization, and you can get hold of these things and put them in to do really repetitive, boring tasks and stitch them together, then what are the humans left doing? And obviously, ultimately, there's still an agent. So you have someone who has to manage the agent and oversee the agent and be accountable for the agent. Legally, you're still going to be accountable. But the more interesting question is, what do the humans do? And I think there's a couple of things that come in there. One is we're really good at things like taste and judgment. We're really good at empathy and we're really emotional and we die and we understand death, which these things don't do. So there's clearly things we can do and we're going to keep doing, and the agents have no evidence or AI has no evidence they can do it for now. I personally think that we're going to go back to the 1970s. And what I mean by that is I think we'll be doing a lot more face to face. I think if imagine AI does all the boring stuff, what you're left with is it can't do the face to face, it can't do the human to human. And human to human is how we work, it's how business is done, it's how we work in life. So I think weirdly it's going to make face to face more valuable.
Wow. Ed, what a fantastic and insightful conversation. Really fascinating. I mean, we started with, there are the early adopters and there are people that are lagging behind, and we've ended with, and what does it mean to be human? And I think that that is a hugely important question. And what is the role of humans, and how do we maintain our level of identity and who we are? Because work does give people a sense of identity, a
Yes.
sense of fulfillment. I mean, work is not just about, that functional level of earning a salary or an income. It goes, the benefits are much, much deeper and wider than just that. But between those 2 points, I mean, there's been a range of things that we've covered, not least an explanation of what tokens are, the impact on jobs and how that might unfold over a period of time, and also looking at how organizations ought to be thinking about AI, which is not just about using it for reducing costs, but also looking to improve and increase revenue and improve productivity. And I'm not sure there's enough attention given to that side of the equation. But Ed, let me thank you for joining me on the AI Adoption Podcast. As ever, I'd like to thank the listeners, and I would ask you to remember to follow and to subscribe.
Thank you, Ashley. It's been a pleasure.